双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
Beasts, Men and Gods by Ferdinand Ossendowski. Explanatory note. When one of the leading publicists in America, Dr. Albert Shaw of the Review of Reviews, after reading the manuscript of Part 1 of this volume, characterized the author as the Robinson Crusoe of the 20th century, he touched the feature of the narrative which is at once most attractive and most dangerous. For the succession of trying and thrilling experiences recorded seems in places too highly colored to be real or, sometimes, even possible in this day and generation. I desire, therefore, to assure the reader at the outset that Dr. Ossendowski is a man of long and diverse experience as a scientist and writer with a training for careful observation which should put the stamp of accuracy and reliability on his chronicle. Only the extraordinary events of these extraordinary times could have thrown one with so many talents back into the surroundings of the caveman, and thus given to us this unusual account of personal adventure, of great human mysteries, and of the political and religious motives which are energizing the heart of Asia. My share in the work has been to induce Dr. Ossendowski to write his story at this time and to assist him in rendering his experiences into English. Lewis Stanton Palin. Contents.
Part 1.
Drawing Lots with Death.
Chapter.
I. Into the Forests.
2.
The Secret of My Fellow Traveler.
3.
The Struggle for Life.
4.
A Fisherman. V. A Dangerous Neighbor. 6. A River in Travail.
7.
Through Soviet Siberia.
8.
3 days on the edge of a precipice. 9. To the Scions and Safety. X. The Battle of the Sabi. 11. The Barrier of Red Partisans. 12. In the Country of Eternal Peace. 13. Mysteries, Miracles, and a New Fight. 14. The River of the Devil. 15. The March of Ghosts.
16.
In Mysterious Tibet. Part 2. The Land of Demons. 17. Mysterious Mongolia. 18. The Mysterious Lama Avenger. 19. Wild Chahars. XX. The Demon of Jajastai. 21. The Nest of Death. 22. Among the Murderers. 23. On a Volcano. 24. A Bloody Chastisement. 25. Harassing Days. 26. The Band of White Hunghutzes. 27. Mystery in a Small Temple. 28. The Breath of Death. Part 3. The Straining Heart of Asia. 29. On the Road of Great Conquerors. XX. Arrested. 31. Traveling by Urga. 32. An Old Fortune Teller. 33. Death from the White Man Will Stand Behind You. 34. The Horror of War. 35. In the City of Living Gods. 30. 000 Buddhas and 60. 000 monks. 36. A Son of Crusaders and Privateers. 37. The Camp of Martyrs. 38. Before the Face of Buddha. 39. The Man with a Head Like a Saddle. Part 4. The Living Buddha. XL. In the Blissful Garden of 1,000 Joys. XLI. The Dust of Centuries. 42. The Books of Miracles. 43. The Birth of the Living Buddha. 44. A Page in the History of the Present Living Buddha. XLV. The Vision of the Living Buddha of May 17, 1921.
Part 5.
Mystery of Mysteries, the King of the World. 46. The Subterranean Kingdom. 47. The King of the World Before the Face of God. 48. Reality or Religious Fantasy. 49. The Prophecy of the King of the World in 1890. There are times, men, and events about which history alone can record the final judgments. Contemporaries and individual observers must only write what they have seen and heard. The very truth demands it. Titus Livius. Beasts, Men and Gods. Part 1. Drawing Lots with Death. Chapter 1. Into the Forests. In the beginning of the year 1920, I happened to be living in the Siberian town of Krasnoyarsk, situated on the shores of the river Yenisei, that noble stream which is cradled in the sun-bathed mountains of Mongolia to pour its warming life into the Arctic Ocean, and to whose mouth Nansen has twice come to open the shortest road for commerce from Europe to the heart of Asia. There in the depths of the still Siberian winter, I was suddenly caught up in the whirling storm of mad revolution raging all over Russia. Sowing in this peaceful and rich land vengeance, hate, bloodshed, and crimes that go unpunished by the law. No one could tell the hour of his fate. The people lived from day to day and left their homes, not knowing whether they should return to them or whether they should be dragged from the streets and thrown into the dungeons of that travesty of courts. The Revolutionary Committee, more terrible and more bloody than those of the medieval Inquisition. We who were strangers in this distraught land were not saved from its persecutions, and I personally lived through them. One morning, when I had gone out to see a friend, I suddenly received the news that 20 Red soldiers had surrounded my house to arrest me and that I must escape. I quickly put on one of my friend's old hunting suits, took some money, and hurried away on foot along the back ways of the town till I struck the open road, where I engaged a peasant, who in 4 hours had driven me 20 miles from the town and set me down in the midst of a deeply forested region. On the way I bought a rifle, 300 cartridges, an axe, a knife, a sheepskin overcoat, tea, salt, dry bread, and a kettle. I penetrated into the heart of the wood to an abandoned half-burned hut. From this day, I became a genuine trapper, but I never dreamed that I should follow this role as long as I did. The next morning I went hunting and had the good fortune to kill 2 heathcock. I found deer tracks in plenty and felt sure that I should not want for food. However, my sojourn in this place was not for long. 5 days later, when I returned from hunting, I noticed smoke curling up out of the chimney of my hut. I stealthily crept along closer to the cabin and discovered 2 saddled horses with soldiers' rifles slung to the saddles. 2 disarmed men were not dangerous for me with a weapon, so I quickly rushed across the open and entered the hut. From the bench 2 soldiers started up in fright. They were Bolsheviki. On their big Astrakhan caps I made out the red stars of Bolshevism, and on their blouses the dirty red bands. We greeted each other and sat down. The soldiers had already prepared tea, and so we drank this ever-welcome hot beverage and chatted, suspiciously eyeing one another the while. To disarm this suspicion on their part, I told them that I was a hunter from a distant place and was living there because I found a good country for sables. They announced to me that they were soldiers of a detachment sent from a town into the woods to pursue all suspicious people. "Do you understand, comrade?" said one of them to me. "We are looking for counter-revolutionists to shoot them." I knew it without his explanations. All my forces were directed to assuring them by my conduct that I was a simple peasant hunter and that I had nothing in common with the counter-revolutionists. I was thinking also, all the time, of where I should go after the departure of my unwelcome guests. It grew dark. In the darkness their faces were even less attractive. They took out bottles of vodka and drank, and the alcohol began to act very noticeably. They talked loudly and constantly interrupted each other, boasting how many bourgeoisie they had killed in Krasnoyarsk and how many Cossacks they had slid under the ice in the river. Afterwards they began to quarrel, but soon they were tired and prepared to sleep. All of a sudden, and without any warning, the door of the hut swung wide open, and the steam of the heated room rolled out in a great cloud, out of which seemed to rise like a genie. As the steam settled, the figure of a tall, gaunt peasant, impressively crowned with a high Astrakhan cap and wrapped in the great sheepskin overcoat that added to the massiveness of his figure. He stood with his rifle ready to fire. Under his girdle lay the sharp axe, without which the Siberian peasant cannot exist. Eyes, quick and glimmering like those of a wild beast, fixed themselves alternately on each of us. In a moment he took off his cap, made the sign of the cross on his breast, and asked of us, "Who is the master here?" I answered him, "May I stop the night?" "Yes," I replied. "Place is enough for all.
Take a cup of tea.
It is still hot." The stranger, running his eyes constantly over all of us and over everything about the room, began to take off his skin coat after putting his rifle in the corner. He was dressed in an old leather blouse with trousers of the same material tucked in high felt boots. His face was quite young, fine and tinged with something akin to mockery.
His white,
sharp teeth glimmered as his eyes penetrated everything they rested upon. I noticed the locks of gray in his shaggy head. Lines of bitterness circled his mouth. They showed his life had been very stormy and full of danger. He took a seat beside his rifle and laid his axe on the floor below. "What? Is it your wife?" asked one of the drunken soldiers, pointing to the axe. The tall peasant looked calmly at him from the quiet eyes under their heavy brows, and as calmly answered, "One meets a different folk these days, and with an axe it is much safer." He began to drink tea very greedily, while his eyes looked at me many times with sharp inquiry in them, and ran often round the whole cabin in search of the answer to his doubts. Very slowly, and with a guarded drawl, he answered all the questions of the soldiers between gulps of the hot tea. Then he turned his glass upside down as evidence of having finished, placed on the top of it the small lump of sugar left, and remarked to the soldiers, "I am going out to look after my horse, and will unsaddle your horses for you also." "All right," exclaimed the half-sleeping young soldier. "Bring in our rifles as well." The soldiers were lying on the benches, and thus left for us only the floor. The stranger soon came back, brought the rifles, and set them in the dark corner. He dropped the saddle pads on the floor, sat down on them, and began to take off his boots. The soldiers and my guests soon were snoring, but I did not sleep for thinking of what next to do. Finally, as dawn was breaking, I dozed off only to awake in the broad daylight and find my stranger gone. I went outside the hut and discovered him saddling a fine bay stallion. "Are you going away?" I asked. "Yes, but I want to go together with these comrades," he whispered, "and afterwards I shall come back." I did not ask him anything further, and told him only that I would wait for him. He took off the bags that had been hanging on his saddle, put them away out of sight in the burned corner of the cabin, looked over the stirrups and bridle, and, as he finished saddling, smiled and said, "I am ready. I'm going to awake my comrades." Half an hour after the morning drink of tea, my 3 guests took their leave. I remained out of doors, and was engaged in splitting wood for my stove. Suddenly, from a distance, rifle shots rang through the woods. First one, then a second. Afterwards all was still. From the place near the shots a frightened covey of blackcock broke and came over me. At the top of a high pine, a jay cried out. I listened for a long time to see if anyone was approaching my hut, but everything was still. On the lower Yenisei, it grows dark very early. I built a fire in my stove and began to cook my soup, constantly listening for every noise that came from beyond the cabin walls. Certainly I understood at all times very clearly that death was ever beside me and might claim me by means of either man, beast, cold, accident, or disease. I knew that nobody was near me to assist, and that all my help was in the hands of God, in the power of my hands and feet, in the accuracy of my aim, and in my presence of mind. However, I listened in vain. I did not notice the return of my stranger. Like yesterday, he appeared all at once on the threshold. Through the steam, I made out his laughing eyes and his fine face. He stepped into the hut and dropped with a good deal of noise 3 rifles into the corner. 2 horses, 2 rifles, 2 saddles, 2 boxes of dry bread, half a brick of tea, a small bag of salt, 50 cartridges, 2 overcoats, 2 pairs of boots. Laughingly, he counted out. In truth, today, I had a very successful hunt. In astonishment, I looked at him. What are you surprised at?
He laughed.
Koma nujni eti tovariski? Who's got any use for these fellows? Let us have tea and go to sleep. Tomorrow I will guide you to another safer place, and then go on. Chapter 2. The Secret of My Fellow Traveler. At the dawn of day, we started forth, leaving my first place of refuge. Into the bags we packed our personal estate and fastened them on one of the saddles. "We must go 4 or 500 versts," very calmly announced my fellow traveler, who called himself Ivan, a name that meant nothing to my mind or heart in this land where every second man bore the same. "We shall travel then for a very long time," I remarked regretfully. "Not more than 1 week. Perhaps even less,"
he answered.
That night we spent in the woods under the wide, spreading branches of the fir trees. It was my first night in the forest under the open sky. How many like this I was destined to spend in the year and a half of my wanderings. During the day, there was very sharp cold. Under the hoofs of the horses the frozen snow crunched, and the balls that formed and broke from their hoofs rolled away over the crust with a sound like crackling glass. The heathcock flew from the trees very idly. Hares loped slowly down the beds of summer streams. At night the wind began to sigh and whistle as it bent the tops of the trees over our heads, while below it was still and calm. We stopped in a deep ravine bordered by heavy trees, where we found fallen firs, cut them into logs for the fire, and, after having boiled our tea,
dined.
Ivan dragged in 2 tree trunks, squared them on one side with his axe, laid one on the other with the squared faces together, and then drove in a big wedge at the butt ends which separated them 3 or 4 inches. Then we placed live coals in this opening and watched the fire run rapidly the whole length of the squared faces vis. "Now there will be a fire in the morning,"
he announced.
This is the Nida of the gold prospectors. We prospectors wandering in the woods summer and winter always sleep beside this Nida.
"Fine.
You shall see for yourself," he continued. He cut fir branches and made a sloping roof out of them, resting it on 2 uprights toward the Nida. Above our roof of boughs and our Nida spread the branches of protecting fir. More branches were brought and spread on the snow under the roof. On these were placed the saddle cloths, and together they made a seat for Ivan to rest on and to take off his outer garments down to his blouse. Soon I noticed his forehead was wet with perspiration and that he was wiping it and his neck on his sleeves. "Now it is good and warm," he exclaimed. In a short time I was also forced to take off my overcoat and soon lay down to sleep without any covering at all, while through the branches of the fir trees and our roof glimmered the cold bright stars, and just beyond the Nida raged a stinging cold, from which we were cozily defended. After this night, I was no longer frightened by the cold. Frozen during the days on horseback, I was thoroughly warmed through by the genial Nida at night and rested from my heavy overcoat, sitting only in my blouse under the roofs of pine and fir and sipping the ever-welcome tea. During our daily treks Ivan related to me the stories of his wanderings through the mountains and woods of Transbaikalia in the search for gold. These stories were very lively, full of attractive adventure, danger, and struggle. Ivan was a type of these prospectors who have discovered in Russia, and perhaps in other countries, the richest gold mines, while they themselves remain beggars. He evaded telling me why he left Transbaikalia to come to the NSA. I understood from his manner that he wished to keep his own counsel, and so did not press him. However, the blanket of secrecy covering this part of his mysterious life was one day quite fortuitously lifted a bit. We were already at the objective point of our trip. The whole day we had traveled with difficulty through a thick growth of willow, approaching the shore of the big right branch of the NSA, the Mana. Everywhere we saw runways packed hard by the feet of the hares living in this bush. These small white denizens of the wood ran to and fro in front of us. Another time we saw the red tail of a fox hiding behind a rock, watching us and the unsuspecting hares at the same time. Ivan had been silent for a long while. Then he spoke up and told me that not far from there was a small branch of the Mana, at the mouth of which was a hut. "What do you say? Shall we push on there, or spend the night by the Nida?" I suggested going to the hut, because I wanted to wash and because it would be agreeable to spend the night under a genuine roof again. Ivan knitted his brows but acceded. It was growing dark when we approached a hut surrounded by the dense wood and wild raspberry bushes. It contained one small room with 2 microscopic windows and a gigantic Russian stove. Against the building were the remains of a shed and a cellar. We fired the stove and prepared our modest dinner. Ivan drank from the bottle inherited from the soldiers, and in a short time was very eloquent, with brilliant eyes and with hands that coursed frequently and rapidly through his long locks. He began relating to me the story of one of his adventures, but suddenly stopped and, with fear in his eyes, squinted into a dark corner. "Is it a rat?" he asked. "I did not see anything," I replied. He again became silent and reflected with knitted brow. Often we were silent through long hours, and consequently, I was not astonished. Ivan leaned over near to me and began to whisper. "I want to tell you an old story. I had a friend in Transbaikalia. He was a banished convict. His name was Gavrinsky. Through many woods and over many mountains we traveled in search of gold, and we had an agreement to divide all we got into even shares. But Gavrinsky suddenly went out to the taiga on the Yenisei and disappeared. After 5 years we heard that he had found a very rich gold mine and had become a rich man. Then later that he and his wife with him had been murdered." Ivan was still for a moment and then continued. "This is their old hut. Here he lived with his wife, and somewhere on this river he took out his gold. But he told nobody where. All the peasants around here know that he had a lot of money in the bank and that he had been selling gold to the government. Here they were murdered." Ivan stepped to the stove, took out a flaming stick and, bending over, lighted a spot on the floor. "Do you see these spots on the floor and on the wall? It is their blood, the blood of Gavrinsky. They died, but they did not disclose the whereabouts of the gold. It was taken out of a deep hole which they had drifted into the bank of the river and was hidden in the cellar under the shed. But Gavrinsky gave nothing away. And Lord, how I tortured them! I burned them with fire. I bent back their fingers. I gouged out their eyes. But Gavrinsky died in silence." He thought for a moment, then quickly said to me, "I have heard all this from the peasants." He threw the log into the stove and flopped down on the bench. "It's time to sleep," he snapped out, and was still. I listened for a long time to his breathing and his whispering to himself, as he turned from one side to the other and smoked his pipe. In the morning we left the scene of so much suffering and crime, and on the 7th day of our journey we came to the dense cedar wood growing on the foothills of a long chain of mountains. From here, Ivan explained to me, it is 80 versts to the next peasant settlement. The people come to these woods to gather cedar nuts, but only in the autumn. Before then you will not meet anyone. Also you will find many birds and beasts and a plentiful supply of nuts, so that it will be possible for you to live here. Do you see this river? When you want to find the peasants, follow along the stream, and it will guide you to them." Ivan helped me build my mud hut, but it was not the genuine mud hut. It was one formed by the tearing out of the roots of a great cedar that had probably fallen in some wild storm, which made for me the deep hole as the room for my house, and flanked this on one side with a wall of mud held fast among the upturned roots. Overhanging ones formed also the framework into which we interlaced the poles and branches to make a roof, finished off with stones for stability and snow for warmth. The front of the hut was ever open but was constantly protected by the guardian Nida. In that snow-covered den I spent 2 months like summer without seeing any other human being and without touch with the outer world where such important events were transpiring. In that grave under the roots of the fallen tree, I lived before the face of nature with my trials and my anxiety about my family as my constant companions, and in the hard struggle for my life. Ivan went off the 2nd day, leaving for me a bag of dry bread and a little sugar. I never saw him again. Chapter 3. The Struggle for Life. Then I was alone. Around me only the wood of eternally green cedars covered with snow, the bare bushes, the frozen river, and, as far as I could see out through the branches and the trunks of the trees, only the great ocean of cedars and snow. Siberian taiga. How long shall I be forced to live here? Will the Bolsheviki find me here or not? Will my friends know where I am? What is happening to my family? These questions were constantly as burning fires in my brain. Soon I understood why Ivan guided me so long. We passed many secluded places on the journey, far away from all people, where Ivan could have safely left me, but he always said that he would take me to a place where it would be easier to live. And it was so. The charm of my lone refuge was in the cedar wood and in the mountains covered with these forests which stretched to every horizon. The cedar is a splendid, powerful tree with wide, spreading branches, an eternally green tent, attracting to its shelter every living being. Among the cedars was always effervescent life. There the squirrels were continually kicking up a row, jumping from tree to tree. The nut jobbers cried shrilly.